Hey everyone, and welcome back to a series of Python course. In this session, we are going to take a look at the introduction to variables and functions topic. In the last session, we saw the command for displaying hello world or anything else on the screen. Today, you should be able to understand that command in a little bit more detail. So let's get started. First of all, we are going to take a look at the concept of variables. Now, what is a variable? A variable is a storage container having a name in Python. It's a storage container basically having a name. It has a name where we can store some value. So a variable is basically a storage, let's say a kind of box, and it has a name. So let's say its name is ABC. ABC is the name, let's say, of this box where we can store some value. So let's say we are going to store the value 3. Now it is used to store some values and then use them later on where we need to. Basically, a variable is nothing but a storage container, you can say, or something where we can store something. It has a name and some value. Obviously, if we are storing something, we would be storing some values, right? But it also has something else except other than the value part, which is name. Now, why is this name so important here? So let's say in our program, there is our program. We wrote so many lines of code, and now in those lines of codes, we made, let's say, 10 variables. So how would we recognize each of them separately? So we have to give a separate and a unique name to each of the variable. And now it is used to store some values and then use them later on where we need to. So let's say we have to work with a value that we don't know right now, right, during the execution. So what we can do is, when we know the value of when we know the exact value, we can store that value in a variable, and then when we need to use that value, we can use that by putting the variable name in place of the value. You will understand how we do that when we do the practical. So for example, let's say I have to print a value that we don't know, right? So let's say we have to take the input from the user. So we don't know what the user will enter. So what we can do is we can store the value inputted by the user, and then we can print out that value using a variable. Now taking user inputs will come later. I was just giving you an example of how we can use a variable. Now a variable has a name and a value, as I already discussed about it. Now let's see how can we create a variable. So syntax for creating a variable is variable name, the name that we want to give the variable. So first of all, we have to write the variable name that we want to create, the name of the variable that we want to give to the variable, and then an equal sign, and then we have to write the value that we want to store in that variable. This is basically the syntax. So let's see some examples on it. Let's say we want to give the variable a name of a. So we wrote a like that, and then equal sign, and then value to be stored. So let's say we want to store the value of 23. That's why we wrote 23. And this command will make a variable named a, storing the value 23. Similarly, capitals XYZ equal to 56.7. In this example, we are making a variable which is named as capital XYZ, and it is storing the value of 56.7, a decimal number. In the third example, we are creating a variable name. Sorry, we are creating a variable, and the name which we are giving to it is itself called name, and we are assigning the value of of a text here instead of a number. Yes, we can assign actually any value to a variable. It can be a number, it can be a text, or anything else. So as we already know, for representing text we have to use double quotes or single quotes. We already saw that in the previous tutorials, but more details on text will come later on. For now, just understand, if we have to represent any text, any plain text, we have to include double quotes or single quotes. So in the third case, a variable called name is being created, storing the value of Anshu. So now let's check this in action. Let's open up IDLE and try all these things. There we go. IDLE is launched. So let's check all these things one by one. First of all, let's try this one. A is equal to 23. So first variable name, let's say A, then an equal sign, and then 23. What does this mean? This is creating a variable called A, assigning it the value of 23. Done. But wait, we didn't get any output. Think about it. What will we get as the output? We are just making a variable. We are just creating a variable and storing some value in it. We should not expect any output, right? So that's why we didn't get anything. But trust me, the value of 23 has been assigned to a variable called A. Let's try the next example. X, Y, Z is equal to 56.7. This works as well, so we can use capitals. The last one, name, is equal to Anshu as a text. So this worked as well. Obviously, we know that we have to cover Anshu in quotation marks, either single or double. So, but we are not getting any output. So how do we know this is exactly working? Well, if you remember properly, I said you earlier that we can store the values of variables. Sorry, we can store the values in variables, and later on, if we have to, we can use those values. So we know a command to print something, right? So let's experiment that command with these variables. Let's see what happens when we pass the name of the variable inside that command. Let's say print, inside that, let's say first of all A. So what do you think? What will happen? This is not a text. Notice here properly. If it was a text, it should have been covered in quotes. But here I'm not covering it in quotes. So it's not a text here. Now, a very important thing. If a word in Python is not covered in text in quotation marks like that, you have to treat that as a variable, right? Python treats that word as a variable. Okay, so if we say print A without quotation marks, it is treating A as a variable. So now what do you think will happen? Will it just show A as a text? So first of all, let's see what happens if I do this. Obviously this will show A as a text because it's just a plain text. But now let's try with a variable called A. Let's just pass the variable name and see, we got 23 here. How did that happen? Actually, when we pass the variable inside of print command, what does it do is it fetches the value of the variable, which was 23 over here, and then it displays it on the screen. So that's why we got 23. So similarly, we can check all the variables like x, y, z. We got 56.7. Next step is name. It should show unshoe. Yep, it sure did. So now you have got a proof that variables are actually working. Variables are actually storing those values which we assigned. One more thing, notice here properly, I have not put anything like space here and it's looking kind of cumbersome, right? So while making variable, you can also leave some spaces before equal signs and it will not make any difference in the code. Python will treat that as well in the same way. So let's say we want to make a variable called b is equal to 67.9. So instead of without using space this time, let's just add a space and this is looking much better. So you can do like that. Let's just print b and obviously we got 67.9. So you got the point, I hope. And if you are confused anywhere, please let me know in the comments. I will be really happy to help you. We'll learn more about variables in the next session. Let's move on for now. Now let's understand the concept of functions very briefly. What is a function? Okay, we are going to take it very briefly in this session. We'll understand that deeply in some later sessions, not the next session, it will come later on. But for now, I just want to give you the introduction to it so that you can understand some basic things in Python. Now, let's see the brief definition of a function. A function is a command in Python that performs a specific or particular action. Okay, so a function is nothing but a command. Okay, so what commands we have seen? The main command that we have seen was actually print, right? That was a command. So is print a function? Let's check it out. So a function is a command in Python that performs a specific or particular action. Now there can be various functions, various actions we have to perform in Python, like displaying something on the screen, taking some user inputs, calculating the sum, calculating the difference, etc., etc. And if a function can perform a specific action, for example, let's say there is a function that is used to calculate the sum. Sorry, there is a command to calculate the sum of some given numbers. We will call that command a function because it's performing a specific action here or a specific task here, and that specific action is nothing but calculating the sum here. Okay, so basically a function is nothing but a command in Python that performs a specific or particular action or task. Now let's see some examples of functions in Python. So on the left side we have the name of some functions over here, and on the right side I have provided the specific or particular action that the corresponding function performs. The first one is print. This function is used to display anything on the screen. Obviously we have used this function, right? We have used the print command, and if you notice properly, it's also performing a particular or a specific action. It is being used by us to display anything, whether it is a text or a number or anything else on the screen. So that's a specific action. The next example is input. It is used to take input from the user using the keyboard. The next one is sum. Is used to calculate the sum in a sequence. We'll understand about these functions later on. I was just giving you an example of how functions, what functions are. So now you should be having more confirmation or more, what to say, more knowledge of what this thing is, what print exactly is. Print is nothing but a function, and it performs a specific task of printing something on the screen. Whether it's stored in a variable, it's a string, whether it's stored in a variable, it's a text, a number, or anything else. So for example, let me just show you print 45. This will perform a specific task over here, and that specific task is printing 45 on the screen. Basically print, and whatever we pass in between these parentheses or brackets, that will print that thing out, and that's its specific action. So I hope you got the point. Okay, so this is it for this session on Python. I hope I was able to give some basic ideas about variables and functions in Python. Later on, we will understand both of these things much deeply. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.